Are visitations by demons just the fanciful imaginings of fiction writers and Hollywood movie producers? Or do they really occur? Joe Heinzelman says they do.
There are demons that are set to keep us from God. There are demons that are set to do nothing but to frustrate the maturing process. There's no other grand scheme that they have but to do those two things.
Joe grew up in Missouri. He attended church as a boy but never had a relationship with Christ. Even when he was young, Joe could sense a spiritual battle brewing around him.
I used to love riding my bike, and there was a bike path that ran along the ditch, and I remember riding it from my friend's house, and I just really felt this presence of light on one side of me and a presence of darkness on the other side, and I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and was like, well, whichever one of you gets me first can have me.
Joe had few friends. He also never knew his birth father. The loneliness and fear he felt as a child would lead him down a dark path.
The biggest thing I was looking for back then would be relationships. It was the piece of my life I felt was missing.
When his mother and stepfather separated, Joe began to fill the void in his life with alcohol and eventually the occult. He started experimenting with a Ouija board, which opened doors that would not be easily closed.
We had some very powerful experiences then, and I just felt this something extra in me, and I knew that something was different. And I remember walking down the street that night, and the cats were in the yard, and they would just start hissing. And
later, as an adult, Joe met 3 demons.
The demons had really started making themselves very known to me at that time. There was 3 of them. One was a manipulator, and it took on the female persona. The other was a tormentor, and he took on the male persona, and then the other one was the mastermind. Every night I would meet with them, and they would just fill me with this knowledge of the kingdom of darkness and how they operate. It was one of those moments that, look, if you'll just let us teach you, then we'll give you everything you want.
Joe says the demons began prodding him to harass Christians.
They began to put me into situations where, you know, you'd have good-hearted Christian people, evangelists out, you know, preaching in the streets. I would engage them in conversation, and 9 times out of 10, they would be outside with me 30 minutes later smoking a cigarette, questioning their faith. That was a big thing to me, to be able to unhinge a believer.
One evening, Joe says his demons told him to go and disrupt a church service.
They told me to mock God in his own house, and this was exciting for me. And so we go to this little tiny storefront church. As I was walking into the doors, those 3 handlers had to stand outside the door. It wasn't that they didn't want to go in, it was that they couldn't go in.
That night, the war for Joe's soul intensified.
The singer began to sing about taking the children back from the devil, and I got infuriated. I mean, it was just boiling inside of me, and I was wanting to explode and to tell her, man, leave the children alone, they're mine.
Eventually, the pastor gave an altar call.
This lady comes to me and asked me if I wanted to accept Jesus into my heart. And I told her, lady, you're a woman of God, and I don't want nothing from you because you got nothing I want. I don't have any clue how I got there, but I was at the altar. For almost 45 minutes, they were just casting these demons out of me all over the sanctuary. And so all I could think about was, man, the devil's gonna kill me. You know, they're waiting for me right outside. And this sweet old lady was patting me on the back, and she's like, oh, you're gonna be okay, son. It'll be all right, don't worry.
Joe says although he accepted Christ that night, he didn't surrender his heart.
He broke those strongholds off of me, but there was still that broken heart that he wanted to heal. I remember looking back as I was getting into the car at those 3 handlers and just the hate that they were filled with, and the darkness and it was all just directed to me, and I knew that it was on, you know, I knew that they were coming for me.
Over the next 9 months, he went on a drug and alcohol binge, trying to run away from God.
I was so willing to run back into the darkness of trying to get high enough and trying to get drunk enough and trying to do enough crazy things to get this influence of light away from me.
He was arrested for robbing convenience stores and sent to jail. He became involved in a prison gang and was even planning to kill a man to prove himself. But then,
November 16th of 2002, I sat on a park bench overlooking the prison yard. Another gentleman that I had been in several violent altercations with had come, and he just asked me some questions.
At that point, Joe was faced with the many bad choices he had made in life.
God used him to speak his truth in my heart, to tell me that, man, I have a better path for you. And I decided, you know what? Whatever you have for me, if you can get me out of this moment, then if you have something better than my plan, then I'm willing to do it. And so I got off that park bench that day and started walking towards God and never looked back.
Joe says he now realizes how God used his time in jail to speak to him.
That I had to be in prison because I had to be in a place where I could not escape and I could not control. Because with the world, I could get lost and I could run and run. I know what it means for David when he said, I make my bed in hell and lo, you are with me. You know, because when I ran back out into the world, he was still there and he was still wanting to love me.
Before he was released, Joe entered a 12-step program and with God's help was freed from substance abuse and the demons that tormented him for so many years.
God was constantly showing me that he is so much more powerful than any of these things, and that Jesus came to set us free from those things, that those things do not have to have the reign in our lives that we give it.
Upon his release, Joe got a job working with troubled youth at a ranch in Arkansas. He also pastors a small church and ministers to those who struggle with demonic influences in their lives.
Jesus says that we can know God as God knows us. Man, I want to know how many hairs is on his head. I want intimacy with Christ and with the Father. You know, there's a lost and dying world out there that needs to know that he loves us and he's more powerful than any darkness that could ever overtake you. His grace and his mercy, his compassion for you is greater than any sin.